So, you're holding a property title in your hands. It's official, it's heavy, and it feels like the ultimate proof that this piece of earth belongs to you.
Right. The Torrens System.
Exactly. The Torrens System.
Yeah.
It was designed to replace the old, messy way of tracking deeds with a single, conclusive document. You know, the final word on ownership.
But what if that final word isn't actually final?
Yeah, that's exactly what we're looking at today. In this exploration into the source material, we're doing a legal reality check. We are essentially deconstructing the myth that a registered title is some kind of impenetrable shield.
It's a really necessary reality check.
It is. So we'll look at why registration doesn't actually grant you land, why a clever bit of chicanery can melt your legal protections away, and why a shifting river might actually have more power than the government seal.
It is a shock to most people because, I mean, we're taught that the registry is the beginning and the end of the story.
The absolute truth.
Yeah, but we have to look at what that piece of paper actually represents. It's not the property itself.
Right. And the material makes a really sharp distinction here. Confirmation versus acquisition.
Exactly.
Think of the registration as a photograph of the owner, not the person themselves. So if the person in the photo doesn't actually exist.
Meaning you never had a valid legal right to the land in the first place.
Right. The photograph doesn't magically bring that right to life. You basically can't register a lie and have it become the truth.
Precisely. The certificate is evidence of title, not the title itself. And this is where the rule of good faith becomes the foundation. The law just assumes you're acting honestly.
But if you aren't...
Well, if you register a property through what the text calls chicanery...
essentially trickery.
Yeah, underhanded legal maneuvering. The system doesn't just look the other way. It treats that registration as if it never happened.
But that creates a bit of a worry, doesn't it? Like, if the system is just evidence, couldn't a bad actor just lie better?
You'd think so, but that's where we see the stress of rectitude.
Which is such a great phrase.
It really is. Think of it as a legal safety valve. When a rigid rule is being weaponized by a fraudster or a usurper, the court steps in.
It essentially says the spirit of justice takes priority over the font on the paper.
Yes. The law uses tools like constructive trusts or reconveyance to force the person who cheated back to reality, making them hand the property back to the rightful owner.
Okay, so the paperwork isn't a shield for scammers. But even if you're a perfectly honest owner, there's another force that can shrink your borders.
Nature.
The document talks about repairing diminution.
It's a fascinating admission by the legal system that physical reality beats the document.
So if you own land next to a river...
and that river gradually shifts its course and eats away at your bank, your registered title won't stop it. You can't point at your map and tell the river it's trespassing.
Wow, and this also extends to the public domain trap, right?
Yeah. There are things the government simply cannot sell or register to a private individual, like the foreshore or navigable rivers.
And here's the really high-stakes part. If those public lands are accidentally included in your title, that entire section of the title is null and void.
Completely void.
You might think you own a private beach because your paper says so, but the law says that paper was a mistake from day one. It's a legal nullity.
It really highlights why you can't just trust the face of the document. There's also the issue of subsisting liens.
The hitter burdens.
Right. Statutory debts like taxes that stay attached to the land, even if they aren't written down on your specific certificate.
So you could buy what looks like a clean title and still lose the property to a debt you didn't even create.
Unfortunately, yes. And that brings us to the final limit, which is maybe the most sobering, the 30-year bar or latches.
It's essentially the danger of neglect.
Inexcusable neglect.
Yeah. If someone else is using your land and you just don't say anything for 30 years, the law calls that a stale demand.
You lose your right to kick them off simply because you waited too long to care. It's a use it or lose it philosophy. The Torrens system provides security, but it doesn't reward those who sleep on their rights.
You have to be an active participant.
Absolutely.
So while that heavy piece of paper in your hand is a powerful tool, it's not a magic wand. Protecting your property requires good faith, constant vigilance, and an awareness of the world outside the registry office.
Well said.
We like to think of the law as something that freezes the world in place. But between the stale demand of a 30-year silence and the physical power of a shifting river, your rights are much more fluid than they appear. So I leave you with this. If the physical world changes, or if you simply stop paying attention to what's yours, does that piece of paper even matter?
You know, most of us think that holding a title to a piece of land, it's like having an unbeatable hand in poker, right? I mean, it's the ultimate proof of ownership, an ironclad absolute guarantee. But what if I told you that piece of paper isn't nearly as invincible as you think? Well, today, we're going to dig into the surprising limits of land ownership.
All right, let's just dive right in with a scenario. I want you to picture this. You're at home, minding your own business, and there's a knock on the door. It's a stranger, and they're holding a registered title for your house. And your name? It's not on it. Theirs is. So, is that it? Game over? Is the house legally theirs now? Well, the answer is way more complex and honestly a lot more fair than you might think.
Okay, so to really understand why you're not powerless, we've got to talk about something called the Torrens System. Now, this is basically the bedrock of land registration in a lot of countries. The idea itself is actually pretty simple and powerful. Just think of it like a master list kept by the government for all land. Your title is supposed to be the final conclusive proof that your name is on that master list, right next to your property. The whole point was to create certainty and get rid of all the confusion. But, and this is a big but, here's where we get to the absolute heart of the myth. See, this whole system has a fundamental rule that pretty much changes everything. And that brings us to our first huge point. A title's real job is to confirm ownership, not to create it out of nowhere. Right. So here's the crucial takeaway. A certificate of title doesn't just magically poof ownership into existence. Think about it like a receipt. A receipt proves you bought something, right? But it's not the act of buying it. In the same way, the title is just the official paperwork that records a right you already gained, legitimately. It can't just grant you a right that you never actually had in the first place. And look, this isn't just some abstract theory. It's a core legal principle. Justice Florence Regalado put it perfectly. A title is, and I quote, merely evidence. It doesn't make your claim any better than it actually is. So if your original claim to the land was, let's say, a little shaky, getting a title for it doesn't magically make it solid rock. And this is especially true if that title was registered in bad faith. And that whole idea of bad faith, well, it's absolutely crucial. It leads us straight into our second major point. The system itself was designed with a kind of moral compass. It's meant to be a shield to protect the innocent, not a sword for someone trying to pull a fast one. And you can really see the difference here. It's like night and day. When a registration is done in good faith, honestly, it acts like that shield we talked about. It confirms a real moral right. But when it's done in bad faith, through lies or outright fraud, the system basically says, nope, doesn't count. It's treated as if the registration never even happened. That fancy title, it becomes a worthless piece of paper, all because it was gotten dishonestly. And this really gets to the whole point of the system. The Torrens system was never, ever designed to help a thief steal land. You just can't use it as a weapon to get rich at someone else's expense. So if you get a title through fraud, the system is not going to protect you from the real owner. Justice will always look past the piece of paper to find out what really happened. Okay, so fraud is a big one, for sure. But it isn't the only crack in a title's supposedly invincible armor. There are a bunch of other built-in limits. You could call it the fine print, and they exist completely outside of what's written on that document.
For one thing, a title doesn't just freeze your property in time. I mean, if a river decides to change course over the years and washes away part of your land, your title isn't a force field. It can't stop it. Or what about this? If you just sit on your rights and don't do anything about someone else using your property for decades, there's a legal concept for that. It's called laches. It basically means you snooze, you lose. Your claim can just go stale. And on top of all that, there can be other legal burdens or liens on the land that are totally valid, even if they're not written down on your certificate.
But out of all these limits, probably the biggest one has to do with land that doesn't belong to any single person. We're talking about public land. It's a fundamental rule of law. Land that's part of the public domain. Think of a beach, a national forest, even a riverbed. It simply cannot be privately owned, period. You can't register it. And here is the real kicker. If someone somehow manages to get a title issued, and it includes even a tiny sliver of public land, even by mistake, it doesn't just mean they don't own that tiny piece. No, that one illegal inclusion can make the entire title completely null and void, gone. The government's claim to public land is absolute, and trying to register it is a fatal mistake for any title. So after hearing about all these exceptions, fraud, neglect, acts of nature, public land, you might be thinking, wow, this system sounds kind of broken. But here's the thing. These aren't bugs, they're features. And this all points us to the system's real purpose, making sure that justice wins out over simple paperwork. And this really is the core idea of this whole explainer. The entire legal framework is built on a foundation of rectitude, which is just a great word for moral rightness, for integrity. The courts aren't just going to look at a document and take a super narrow literal reading if it's going to lead to a totally unjust result. The system is specifically designed to reject lies and deceit, not to reward them.
So what's the ultimate takeaway? Well, the myth of the unbeatable title completely falls apart because the system was always meant to be more than just a giant filing cabinet. It's a mechanism for fairness. And that leaves us with a pretty big question to think about. What is more important? What do we really want from our legal systems? The cold, rigid certainty of a piece of paper, or a system that has the wisdom and the flexibility to deliver real, actual justice?
Welcome back to the deep end. We are back with another deep dive today, and I'm genuinely excited for this one because we are taking something that is literally sitting in the dark for most people.
Yeah, usually locked away somewhere safe.
Right, exactly. Like maybe in a heavy metal safe in your parents' closet, or maybe a shoebox under the bed, and we are dragging it out into the light today.
It is an object that it represents the ultimate security blanket for adults.
It really is. I want to ask you, the listener, to just visualize something specific with us for a second. Picture that safe. Inside it, past the old passports and the birth certificates, there's a single sheet of paper.
Usually thick paper, maybe a little yellowed at the edges if it's been there for a few decades.
Yeah, and it's got this big official government seal stamped right on it.
The holy grail of property ownership.
The title, the Torrens title, to be exact.
Yeah.
And if you are 99% of the population, including myself, until I really dug into our source material today, you look at that piece of paper and you just feel this overwhelming sense of permanence.
It feels absolutely bulletproof.
It does. It feels final. It says, in permanent ink, this specific square of the earth belongs to me. Keep out.
Right. It's the foundation of the capitalist dream, essentially. It is the physical manifestation of this is mine. It firmly separates the world into yours and mine.
Exactly. But here's the thing. And this is exactly why we are doing this deep dive today. We have a fascinating stack of source material we're looking at. It's specifically a legal lecture regarding 2022 pre-bar examination review pointers.
And it completely dismantles that security blanket.
It totally shatters it. It turns out that piece of paper you're guarding with your life is not bulletproof at all. It is actually surprisingly fragile.
Fragile is honestly the perfect word for it. We're so conditioned to believe that the title itself is the ownership.
Yeah.
We think the paper carries some kind of magic.
The magic paper.
Exactly. But what this source material exposes, and I have to say it does it quite ruthlessly, is that the paper is really just a shadow. It's a reflection. And if the reality behind that reflection changes, or, if the reflection was cast by a lie to begin with, the paper becomes entirely worthless.
Which is just a terrifying thought for anyone out there currently paying down a 30-year mortgage. You're telling me the paper I am spending half my life paying for might be worthless.
It's a possibility under the right or wrong circumstances.
So that is our mission today. We are going to explore these cracks in the system. And I want to be clear to the listener, we aren't just looking at dry, boring legal codes here. This deep dive is about justice. It's about high-stakes fraud.
It covers the physical movement of rivers, too.
Yes, rivers, and the eroding power of time itself.
When you really boil it down, this is a discussion about the tension between two massive opposing forces in society. On one side, you have certainty.
Which is what we all want, right? We want the law to provide certainty so we can actually sleep at night.
Exactly. But on the other side, you have righteousness, which is what we need the law to uphold so we don't just live in a chaotic dog-eat-dog world.
Yeah.
And as we're going to see as we go through this material, those two things are very often at war with each other.
Certainty versus righteousness. I love that framing. The paper promises certainty, but the law demands righteousness. So let's just strip away all the dense legalese and get right to the core of this. We have to start with the biggest myth of all, which brings us to Section 1, the myth of the magic paper.
Let's do it. It's a great place to start.
The source material jumps straight into the deep end of the Torrens system. Now, for the listeners who might be familiar with the concept but not the exact mechanics, can you briefly set the stage? What exactly is the Torrens system?
Sure. So the Torrens system is basically the machinery of land registration. It's used in many jurisdictions, the Philippines, Australia, parts of Canada, and it was invented to simplify the way we transfer land.
Because before this, it was a nightmare, right?
An absolute nightmare. Before this system, every time you wanted to sell a farm, You had to prove the chain of ownership, going all the way back to the original land grant. It was tedious and prone to errors. The Torrens system changed that, so you just look at the certificate currently sitting in the registry.
The government holds the master copy, essentially.
Right. The government guarantees the certificate.
So it's supposed to be the final word. If the certificate in the big government book says John Doe, then John Doe owns it. End of story.
That is the theory, yes. That is the certainty part we were talking about.
But then our source drops this absolute bombshell right out of the gate. It explicitly says the Torrens title merely confirms a pre-existing right. It acts as confirmation, not acquisition.
And this right here is the concept that trips up almost everyone. Honestly, it trips up a fair number of law students, too. There's a deep, magical thinking fallacy at play in our society regarding this.
What do you mean by magical thinking?
Well, people generally believe that the physical act of walking into the registry of deeds and getting that official stamp is what actually creates the ownership. They view the registry like a factory. Like it's a factory that manufactures your legal right to the land.
You put in money and forms and out pops ownership.
Yeah.
But the source is saying that's not true.
The source is saying absolutely not. The registry is not a factory. It is a camera.
Oh, a camera. I like that.
It takes a snapshot of a right that already exists in the real world. If you do not legally own the land before you walk through those doors, the machine cannot help you. You cannot create a right out of thin air just by printing a document.
The outline uses an analogy here that I think is just brilliant because it takes this really abstract legal philosophy and makes it totally relatable for the listener. It compares a land title to a marriage certificate.
It's a very apt comparison. Let's play that scenario out.
Okay, so picture a wedding. You've got the ceremony, you say the vows in front of everyone, you have the actual relationship between the two people, you have the love well, hopefully you have the love. That relationship, the actual human bond, that is the substance of the marriage.
Correct. In legal terms, that is the pre-existing right. That's the reality on the ground.
Right. And then after the ceremony, you go to the city hall or the church office and you sign a piece of paper. You get a marriage certificate. That certificate proves to the state that you are married. It's your legal proof.
But ask yourself this crucial question. Does that marriage certificate actually create the love?
No, of course not.
Does the certificate cook you dinner? Does the certificate hold your hand when you're sick in the hospital?
No. The certificate is just a piece of paper describing something that already exists in the real world.
Exactly. Now, let's take this analogy to the dark side, which is where the law usually operates. Imagine you grab a total stranger off the street, someone who doesn't know you, certainly doesn't love you. You force them to sign a document at gunpoint, or maybe you just forge their signature completely, and you bribe a clerk to issue a marriage license.
Okay, dark, but I'm following.
You now hold the paper. It looks totally official. It has the shiny seal. It's filed in the cabinet. But are you actually married?
I mean, in the eyes of reality, obviously no. In the eyes of God or society, no.
And eventually, in the eyes of the law, no. Because the substance, the underlying truth, was never there. The paper was fundamentally a lie from the moment it was printed. The Torrens title works the exact same way. It registers ownership. It does not create it.
Wow. Okay, so if I don't actually own the land in reality, like maybe I sold the old deed, or maybe the person who sold the land to me was a scammer who didn't actually own it either. Getting a shiny new title printed with my name on it doesn't magically make me the true owner.
Precisely. You're just holding a very official-looking piece of fiction. Our source material references a real titan of legal philosophy here, Justice Florence Regalado. In a very famous case, Agni versus Director of Lands, he hammered this exact point home.
What did he say?
He explicitly stated that registration is not a mode of acquiring property. He said it was merely evidence of such title.
Merely evidence. That word merely, it does a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence, doesn't it? It feels like a massive demotion. We walk around treating titles like they are the crown jewels, but Justice Regalado is basically saying, no, this is just the receipt.
It is exactly a receipt. And here is the kicker. This is the part that really stings for people who get caught in these disputes. Regalado goes on to clarify that the title does not give the holder any better title than what they actually had before registration.
Wait, hold on, let's pause on that. The better title fallacy. This seems absolutely crucial to everything we're talking about today.
It is the heart of the matter. It's where the certainty shatters.
So let's say my claim to a piece of land is incredibly shaky. Maybe I bought it from a guy who only owned half of it, or there is a massive ongoing boundary dispute with the neighbors, or maybe way back in the chain of sellers, somebody forged a signature, but I ignore all that. I rush down to the registry, I manage to fool the clerk or bypass the system, and I get the official paper. I'm sitting there thinking, I made it. I have the paper, so now my shaky claim is solid gold.
And Justice Regalado is looking down at you and saying, no, you still have a shaky claim. The paper does not cure the defect of your reality.
That's a tough pill to swallow.
It is the takeaway that shatters the illusion of the magic paper. Walking out of that registry office with a brand new title in your hand does not upgrade your ownership status. If you had 0 rights when you entered the building, you have exactly 0 rights when you leave it, completely regardless of what the document itself says.
That is wild, because it implies that the government registry office can and does issue documents that are fundamentally empty. It's like they're handing you a picture of nothing.
That's a great way to put it. You simply cannot create something out of nothing. There is an old Latin legal maxim that applies perfectly here. Nemo dat quod non habet.
And that means?
It means no one gives what they do not have. The registrar sitting at the desk cannot give you ownership of a piece of land if you didn't bring that ownership with you when you walked in.
Okay, but if that's true, if the paper is really just a receipt, then why do we even have this massive, complicated system? Why is everyone so obsessed with it? Why do banks demand to see it before they give you a loan?
Because while the paper doesn't create the right, it is the absolute best evidence of the right that we have. The system is designed to quiet title. That's the legal term for stopping arguments. It's supposed to be the final word that lets business happen.
Assuming everyone plays nice.
Exactly. Assuming, and this is the massive if, holding the whole economy together, assuming everyone is playing by the rules, the entire system is built on a presumption of good faith.
Which brings us perfectly to Section 2. Because, as we all know, human beings do not always play by the rules. We can be greedy, we can be tricky, and we really like to own things we shouldn't.
That is human nature.
This is what I call the moral compass of the law. Or, practically speaking, what happens when you try to be a crook?
And you'll notice, reading through the source material, it gets surprisingly heated in this section. Usually, legal review pointers are dry, sterile, and highly technical. But right here, the language becomes almost moralistic. It starts talking heavily about bad faith.
I noticed that shift in tone, too. The text says that if registration is done in bad faith, the legal effect is as if no registration was made at all. That is an incredibly heavy statement, as if no registration was made at all.
It is the ultimate delete button on your claim.
But how does that even work practically? Physically, I have the paper, I'm holding it in my hand, I can show it to the judge. How can the legal system just pretend it doesn't exist?
To understand that, we have to look at the true intent of the Torrens system. Our source explicitly states that the system was never designed to countenance nor shield fraud. The system acts as a shield, yes. It protects the honest owner from frivolous fake claims. If you are the true owner, the title is your armor.
Right.
But it is not a shield for a usurper.
A usurper, I love that word. It sounds so medieval. It makes me think of Game of Thrones.
It fits the drama of property theft, though. A usurper is someone who seizes the throne, or in this case the family farm, illegitimately. The law is firmly saying, you cannot use our own administrative system as a weapon against us. You cannot use the shield of the Torrens title to hide your theft.
The source actually uses this exact phrase. Deceit is not to be countenanced. Duplicity is not to be rewarded.
Duplicity is not to be rewarded. That is the core legal and philosophical anchor here. It's almost biblical in its tone, frankly. And it brings up another concept mentioned in the text called the stress of rectitude.
The stress of rectitude. I have to say, when I read that, it sounded like a Victorian medical condition. Like, oh, poor Earl, please fetch the smelling salts. He's suffering from a terrible stress of rectitude.
It does sound a bit antiquated.
Yeah.
But let's unpack what it actually means. Rectitude means righteousness. It means moral correctness.
Yeah.
And the stress refers to the heavy emphasis or the pressure that the legal framework places on it.
So the law expects you to be a good person.
It demands it. The law isn't just a cold, calculating machine processing GPS coordinates and stamping forms. It has a conscience. It demands that you come to the table with clean hands.
So it's actively judging your behavior.
It absolutely is judging you. If you use chicanery, which is another great old school word from our source, meaning trickery or deception, if you use chicanery to get that title, the law views that physical title as infected. It's fruit from the poisonous tree.
Okay, let's play this out in a real-world scenario so the listener can really feel the stakes here. Let's say I am the bad guy. I am the villain of this deep dive.
Okay, you are the villain. What did you do?
I've used massive chicanery. I've been highly duplicitous. Let's say I forged a deed of sale from someone's dead grandmother. I totally tricked the system, I paid off a shady notary public, and I managed to get a Torrens title to your ancestral land. And now I'm standing on the property line, waving the paper in your face. I'm saying, it's mine, look at the government seal, look at my name printed right here. Naturally, you take me to court. The judge looks at the evidence and agrees that I acted in bad faith. I forged the document. What actually happens to the land at that point?
This is where the legal remedy is genuinely fascinating. The source introduces a concept called an action for reconveyance based on a constructive trust.
Constructive trust. That sounds very technical. Break that down for us. Is that like a trust fund for a rich kid?
No, not at all. It's a legal fiction. It's a highly specific tool that the court uses to fix a wrong without breaking the entire registry system. Well, when you stole that land by registering it in your name, you presented the law with a paradox. The official state-sanctioned paper says that you own it. But the reality and the morality of the situation says that I own it.
Right, so the official paper and the actual truth are in a fistfight.
Exactly. So to bridge that gap and to avoid saying the registry system is completely broken, the law steps in and says, okay, host, you are indeed the registered owner on paper. We acknowledge the paper. But because you cheated to get it, you are merely holding that title in trust for the real owner.
Oh, that is so clever. So I am not the owner anymore. I'm just the butler.
The caretaker.
You are the involuntary trustee. You are the legal caretaker of the stolen goods. By operation of law, whether you like it or not, you are holding that land for me until the court forces you to legally give it back.
I love the elegance of that. It completely turns the fraudster's victory into a chore. It's like, congratulations, you successfully sold the deed, you beat the system, now you work for me until you return it. Exactly. It powerfully affirms that core idea that duplicity is not rewarded. You absolutely cannot profit from your own fraud. The action for reconveyance is simply the true owner, me in this scenario, coming to you and saying, okay, trustee, my property, please. And the court compels you to sign the papers, transferring it back into my name.
So to sum up this section, the magic paper isn't magic at all if your hands are dirty.
Correct. Fraud unravels everything. It is the kryptonite to the Torrens title's superpower.
Okay, so that covers the active threats, the people maliciously trying to game the system. But the source material takes a turn here that I found really deeply unsettling, because it moves away from the malicious actions of bad people, and it starts talking about the silent, slow-moving threats that you can't really sue.
Yes. We are moving from the moral failings of human beings to the inevitable, unstoppable forces of reality, time and nature.
And this brings us to Section 3, the silent erasers. This completely challenges the whole idea of permanence that we talked about at the very beginning with the safe. Let's start with threat number 1, nature. Specifically, the source spends time talking about riparian owners.
Right. Riparian owners are simply people who own land that sits next to a body of water, usually a river or a stream.
And the source makes this incredibly stark point. It says registration does not protect the owner against the diminution of the area through gradual changes in the course of an adjoining stream.
Diminution. Just a fancy legal word for shrinking.
So let's visualize this. I buy a beautiful, expensive piece of land right next to a winding river. It's picturesque. I set up a nice wooden picnic table out there near the bank. Now, my title, my supposedly bulletproof magic paper, says I own exactly 500 square meters of land. It is written in permanent ink. It is stamped by the government. It has exact GPS coordinates mapping out my 500 square meters.
It looks completely permanent.
But nature doesn't care about my piece of paper, does it?
Nature does not read legal briefs, and it certainly doesn't respect GPS coordinates. Rivers are dynamic forces. They are alive in a physical sense. They meander. They carve into the earth. That is just what rivers do. So over 10, maybe 20 years, the current of that river might naturally shift. It might start scouring away the dirt bank right where your picnic table is sitting.
And if the river just slowly eats away 5 square meters of my land?
It is gone.
But the title says 500 square meters. I paid good money for 500 square meters. The government guaranteed 500 square meters.
And I understand the frustration, but the title is only evidence of the land. It is not the land itself. If the physical soil is washed away down the river and out into the ocean, your ownership dissolves right along with it. You cannot stand on the bank, point to your Torrens title, and tell the river, hey, put my dirt back. You cannot sue the river for trespassing.
That is such a harsh reality check. We treat the paper like it dictates a static reality, like this exact square is yours forever until the end of time. But the earth itself is dynamic.
It's a fundamental disconnect between the static paper record we keep in filing cabinets and the dynamic, ever-changing planet we actually live on. The source is warning us. The physical reality on the ground always trumps the description on the paper. If your solid land slowly becomes a riverbed, it is now part of the public domain. Your title is just a historical souvenir of what used to be there.
A souvenir? Ouch. That really hurts the property value. But wait, let me ask you this. What if the river moves the other way? What if the current slows down and it deposits soil onto my bank and my land actually gets bigger?
That is a process called accretion. And interestingly enough, in many jurisdictions, that new land actually does become yours. You gain property. But the source material here is specifically focusing on the risk, the inherent risk that your guaranteed titled land can just physically vanish.
Okay, so that is the threat of nature. Now let's talk about threat number 2, time. The source uses a word here that I have only ever heard spoken in TV law shows, and to be honest, I never really understood what it meant until I read this outline. Lashes, spelled L-A-C-H-E-S, lashes.
Lashes. It is an equitable doctrine. The source defines it effectively as the failure to assert a legal claim for an unreasonable length of time.
Right.
And it actually mentions a very specific time frame in the text, almost 30 years.
30 years! That is a massive amount of time. That's an entire generation. That's a whole career.
The concept is very often described in law school as sleeping on your rights.
Sleeping on your rights. I really like that visual. You have the right, it's sitting right there in your pocket, but you're just taking a really long nap.
You are legally inactive. Let's create another scenario to explain why this doctrine even exists in the first place, because it sounds unfair at first glance.
Okay, hit me. I'm ready.
You have a title to a nice plot of land out in the province. Maybe you inherited it from your parents. But you live and work in the city, or maybe you even moved abroad. You never visit the land. You don't pay the local property taxes on it. You effectively abandon it. Meanwhile, a completely different family moves onto that land.
So squatters.
Technically, yes. But let's say they act in relatively good faith. The land is empty, overgrown. They think it's completely abandoned. So they clear the brush. They build a modest house. They start farming the soil. They put up fences. They raise their children there. They become an active part of the local community. They live there openly, in the light of day, for decades.
But they are living on my land.
They are. Absolutely. But you do nothing about it. You don't sue them for eviction. You don't send a warning letter. You don't even inspect the property once. You just let it happen. For 30 long years.
But I have the Torrens title in my safe. I can kick them out whenever I finally decide to, right? That is the entire point of the paper.
Well, eventually, you wake up from your nap. Maybe property values spike and you want to sell it. You drive down to the province and you tell this family, get off my land. They naturally say, no, this is our home. So you go to court. And the court might look at you and ask, where have you been for the last 3 decades?
I've been busy. I was living in America. I had a career.
The law deeply values vigilance. The source specifically says that the right to recover possession can be converted into a stale demand.
A stale demand, like an old hard loaf of bread.
Exactly. Now, it's important to clarify, it's not that the squatter suddenly gets a Torrens title automatically printed in their name. It's that your arm of the law has withered away from lack of use. You have lost the legal standing to ask the court for help because your inexcusable neglect suggests you abandon the property entirely.
That seems, I know, controversial. I own it. Why do I have to actively act like I own it? Why is ownership suddenly a job I have to do?
Because land is a finite resource. Society as a whole has a vested interest in land being used, being productive, and being cared for. If you are just hoarding a piece of paper in a safe and letting the actual land sit there and rot, or letting someone else pour their entire life's blood into it, the equity of the situation shifts.
Equity. That's about fairness, right? Not strictly the letter of the law, but what is fair.
Yes, exactly. Lashes is deeply based on fairness. It essentially says to the absentee owner, you didn't care about this land for 30 years. We aren't going to let you completely destroy this family's life now, just because you finally found a piece of paper up in your attic.
Yeah.
It protects the person who has been diligent and productive against the person who has been lazy.
So ownership isn't just a static status that you hold, it's an active verb.
That is the deep philosophical insight of this section. Ownership is an active verb. It requires constant maintenance. If you stop owning the land in the real world, the paper in the safe eventually loses its power to protect you.
Okay, so let's tally this up. We have fraud, which rots the title from the inside out. We have rivers, which physically eat the land from the outside. And we have our own laziness, lashes, which makes the legal power of the title go stale.
The bulletproof armor is looking pretty dented at this point, isn't it?
It really is. And the crazy part is we aren't even done yet. This brings us to Section 4, the hidden fine print. This section is all about liens and burdens. Now, usually when you buy a car, or especially when you buy a house, the absolute first rule of real estate is check the title. You want to see if there is any debt attached to it.
Basic due diligence. You are looking for encumbrances. You desperately want to know if the land is currently acting as collateral for a massive bank loan.
Right. But the source points out something that I found deeply disturbing. It says a certificate of title doesn't necessarily show everything affecting the land.
This is what we call the illusion of a clean title. You hold the document in your hand, you read it top to bottom, it looks pristine, there are no mortgages listed, no adverse claims annotated on the back. You think, great, I am totally in the clear to buy this.
But then the source warns us about statutory liens.
Statutory liens. These are liens which are basically legal claims against the property that arise purely by operation of law. The source notes that these may be subsisting, meaning they are active and very dangerous to a buyer, even if they do not appear anywhere on the certificate of title.
That is just terrifying for a potential buyer. You're telling me there are invisible debts or burdens floating around on the land?
Invisible is exactly the right word. They're completely invisible on the specific piece of paper you are holding, but they are fully visible in the law books.
Give me a concrete example. What kind of invisible monster could be hiding on my newly purchased land?
Unpaid real estate taxes is by far the most common one. The government always gets paid first. Even if the Torrens title doesn't have a big red stamp saying taxes owed, if the previous owner hasn't paid their property tax in 10 years, that massive debt is legally attached to the physical land. You buy the land, congratulations, you just bought the debt.
And I can't go to the mayor and say, but I checked the title, it was blank, I didn't know.
You can certainly say it, but the government won't care at all. These liens exist by operation of law. The existence of the law itself serves as your notice. As a citizen, you are expected to know the statutes. Ignorance is no excuse.
Honestly, this feels like a trap. It feels profoundly unfair to a regular buyer.
It definitely feels that way when you get caught in it. But it emphasizes that the title is merely a summary document, not a comprehensive encyclopedia. It doesn't contain the entire universe of the property's legal status. Another really good example might be agrarian reform laws. There might be rights of tenant farmers that exist by law, which completely override your right to kick them out, even if the title doesn't mention tenants at all.
It's like looking at someone's dating profile online. It shows you their absolute best photo, the highlight reel of their life. But it doesn't tell you that they have massive crippling credit card debt or a criminal record, or that they secretly hate dogs.
That is a very colorful analogy, but it's highly accurate. The title is the public face. It's the dating profile. The statutory liens are the hidden baggage.
So how do you even protect yourself from that?
You have to look way beyond the paper. You have to physically go check with the treasurer's office for unpaid taxes. You have to physically inspect the land yourself to see if there are tenant farmers living there. You have to be a detective.
Again, ownership is work. Buying land is work.
It is a lot of work.
Yeah.
You cannot just blindly trust the magic paper.
Okay, we have finally arrived at Section 5, and I think this is genuinely the most mind-bending part of the entire source material. Section 5, the impossible title.
This section touches on the absolute limits of state power and the concept of the public domain. This is where we really get into constitutional territory.
The basic scenario is this. What happens if the government simply makes a mistake? We treat the government registry like it is completely infallible, but it's made of human beings, bureaucrats. What if they accidentally issue you a Torrens title for something you legally cannot actually own?
The source states clearly on this. Simple possession of a title doesn't make you the true owner of all property described therein.
All property described therein. So theoretically, the title could describe a giant square of land, but I only actually own a tiny triangle inside it.
Exactly. If the technical description includes land, by mistake or oversight of the surveyor or the clerk, that legally cannot be registered, the holder of the paper does not become the owner of that illegal inclusion.
But what kind of land can't be registered? I always thought everything in the world was for sale if you just have enough money.
Not in this legal system.
Yeah.
There are certain things that fundamentally belong to the people, the public dominion. The source gives a few very specific examples. The first one is foreshore lands.
Foreshore lands, that means the beach, right?
Specifically, it's the strip of land between the high tide mark and the low tide mark, that wet sand area. That belongs to the state. It belongs to everyone. You cannot privately own it.
Wait, even if I have a signed Torrens title that explicitly says includes the beach?
Even if your title explicitly says includes the beach, even if it has a beautifully drawn surveyor's diagram of the beach, even if the president of the country signed it personally.
That is crazy. The source also mentions navigable water itself and public domain lands like forests or national parks.
Right, so imagine a corrupt surveyor, or maybe just a really sleepy bureaucrat, issues a title that accidentally overlaps with Manila Bay. Or it includes a massive chunk of a national rainforest that is strictly protected by environmental law.
So I have the paper in my safe. It says owner, host, description, Manila Bay.
You still do not own Manila Bay.
Hey, but the paper, it has the seal.
The paper is totally void regarding that specific portion. The source actually uses the phrase null and void. It states that these things are incapable of registration.
Incapable. Like, it's not just illegal, it's physically impossible in the legal universe.
Yes, and here is the underlying logic, which is very important to grasp. It's all about jurisdiction. The director of lands, the government official who authorizes these titles, only has jurisdiction over alienable and disposable public lands. He does not have any jurisdiction over the public domain, like the ocean or the foreshore.
Ah, I see. It's a jurisdiction issue. He stepped out of his lane.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Let's use one more analogy. If I walk up to you and sell you the Brooklyn Bridge, and I write you a very official-looking receipt for it, do you now own the Brooklyn Bridge?
No, because you don't own the Brooklyn Bridge to begin with. You can't sell what isn't yours.
Precisely. Nemo dat quod non habet, again. And the director of lands doesn't own the public domain in a way that allows him to transfer it to a private citizen. He is an agent of the state, but his powers have strict limits. So the act of including the ocean in your title is ultra vires. That means beyond his power. It is a complete nullity. Legally, it essentially never happened.
The source text says the inclusion nullifies the title regarding those specific parts. So it's kind of like a contract with a hole burned straight through it. The rest of the title might be perfectly fine, the dry land part you bought, but the part claiming the ocean is just blank space.
Correct. It highlights that the state's fundamental protection of public resources heavily overrides the clerical error of issuing a bad title. The rights of the public to access the beach or the navigable river are infinitely superior to your piece of paper.
It really reinforces this core idea that the document is just a document. It's not a magic wand. It can't magically change the nature of the ocean. It can't privatize a protected forest just because a clerk made a typo on a Tuesday.
And thank goodness for that, honestly. Just imagine the absolute chaos if a simple clerical error could privatize a major public highway or a vital river. We would have random people setting up toll booths on every stream in the country.
It would be a complete disaster, but it is definitely a shock to the system for anyone who assumes I have the government stamp, therefore I am God of this coordinate.
You are not God. You are just a temporary custodian of a very specific bundle of rights, and those rights have hard, unforgiving boundaries set by nature, by public policy, and by the rights of your neighbors.
So let's bring this all together. We have covered a massive amount of ground today, pun absolutely intended.
We really have.
We started with the common assumption that the title is absolute, and we've learned through the source material that it's really, really not. Let's recap the big takeaways from our source so the listener can clearly file this away.
First, and most importantly, the title is evidence. It is not the source of the right. It confirms. It does not acquire. It is the marriage certificate. It is not the marriage itself. If the underlying right isn't there, the certificate is empty.
Second point, fraud acts like a delete button. If you register in bad faith, it's as if you never registered at all. The law has a stress of rectitude. You cannot use the law's shield to hide your own crime. If you steal it, you're just holding it in trust for the victim as an involuntary caretaker.
Third, nature and time are silent erasers. Rivers can wash away your land physically, and latches sleeping on your rights for 30 years can wash away your legal claim to it. Ownership requires vigilance. You have to actually show up.
And finally, point 4. You simply cannot own the impossible. Public domain, beaches, navigable waters, they are permanently off limits. Even if a mistaken title says otherwise, the public right prevails over the private paper. The director of lands cannot give away the ocean.
The so what here is deeply significant for everyone listening. The Torrens system is a powerful tool. We definitely don't want to say it's useless. It provides crucial stability. It allows the modern economy to function. Banks rely on it to lend money. But it requires good faith and constant vigilance from everyone. It is not a magical shield that protects you against reality, morality, or the laws of nature.
It's a tool for honest people, not a weapon for crooks.
Precisely. And it works best when it accurately reflects the truth, rather than trying to manufacture a lie.
This leaves me with a really provocative thought to end on today. We spend our whole lives working so hard to own things, to get that piece of paper, to pay off the mortgage and finally get the deed in our hands. It's the American dream, it's the Filipino dream, it's basically the universal dream.
It is the ultimate marker of success for most people. We deeply crave that permanence.
But if a title is just evidence and not the source itself, and if it can be completely nullified by a clerk's mistake or hidden invisible liens or just a shifting river, do we ever truly own land with 100% certainty?
That is the ultimate question, isn't it?
Or are we all just sitting around holding the strongest available evidence and hoping nobody or no river ever challenges it?
It strongly suggests that ownership is not a static state of being. It is a continuous, living relationship. You have a relationship with the physical land, a relationship with the legal system, and a relationship with your neighbors. It is something you have to actively maintain every single day, not just something you put in a safety deposit box and forget about for 30 years.
A continuous relationship. I really like that. It sounds exactly like a marriage. Which brings us right back to the marriage certificate analogy.
Well, sir.
You have to keep working at it, or the piece of paper won't save you in the end.
Very well said.
That's it for today's deep dive. Go check your titles, watch out for moving rivers, and maybe visit that vacant lot you haven't seen in 20 years before someone else moves in and calls it home. We will see you next time.
Welcome to the debate. Today we are dismantling, a myth that sits at the very foundation of modern property ownership. It's a comfortable myth, one that lets homeowners sleep soundly at night.
Yeah, the myth being that once you hold a Torrens title, that official, judicially sealed certificate, you possess this unassailable fortress.
Exactly. Most people believe that the paper, creates the ownership, that the rights to the land are absolute within the four corners of that document. But the source material we're scrutinizing today argues something far more complex. It suggests that the fortress has cracks, the gates are often unlocked, and sometimes the walls are entirely imaginary.
It is frankly a terrifying realization for a property owner. We are so conditioned to trust the bureaucracy implicitly, but the jurisprudence we are looking at suggests that a certificate of title is not the be-all and end-all of ownership. It is merely a rebuttable presumption. I'll be arguing today that true ownership is organic, moral, and physical, while the Torrens system is just a rigid overlay that is surprisingly fragile when it collides with bad faith, the raw forces of nature, or frankly, the higher laws of the public domain.
I wouldn't call it fragile. That implies weakness or poor design. I take the stance that these limitations, these cracks as you call them, are actually the pressure valves that keep the system legitimate. My position is that the Torrens system is a rigorous mechanism for confirming pre-existing rights, not manufacturing them out of thin air. It provides stability precisely because it knows when to bow to reality. It prevents the law from becoming a blunt instrument for theft. I mean, if it were truly absolute, it would be tyrannical.
Then the evidence can be disregarded. I want to explore how the system fails to protect the certificate holder when the physical reality or the moral history of the land contradicts the paper. The text is very explicit. The system effectively vanishes when confronted with the stress of rectitude.
Then let's test the strength of those walls. To understand my defense of the system, we really have to ground this in the seminal case of Agne versus Director of Lands. Justice Florence Regalado laid out the architecture here. His core thesis is that the Torrens title confirms a pre-existing right. This is the critical insight for this discussion. The registration process is not some magical cauldron that cooks up ownership. You must already own the land essentially through inheritance, purchase, possession before the state confirms it.
Right, which sounds logical on its face, but pause on the implication there. If the registration is just a confirmation, then the registration itself is secondary to the fact of ownership.
Secondary in origin perhaps, but primary in function. The implication is stability. By confirming the right, the state issues a certificate that acts as conclusive evidence. It sets an incredibly high bar for anyone challenging you. It's a quieting of title. The general rule is conclusiveness. When we talk about limitations today, we must remember they are the exceptions. For 99% of the economy, that certificate is the gold standard. It allows for mortgages, sales, inheritances to happen without relitigating the history of the land every single time a lot is sold.
But Justice Regalato's exposition cuts the other way too, doesn't it? By admitting it is mere evidence, he strips the title of its indefeasibility. My position, drawn from that same text, is that registration does not give the holder a better title than what they actually possess in reality. This is the illusion of absolutes. If you acquired the land through a moral wrong, or if you don't actually possess the right to the soil, the registration is hollow. The source material is scathing on this. It says the system cannot be used to shield fraud or perpetrate fraud against the rightful owner.
Well, no legal system should shield fraud. That isn't a weakness of the Torrens system, it's a strength of the judicial system generally.
But the Torrens system is sold to the public as indefeasible. That means cannot be defeated. Yet the text says if registration is done in bad faith, the legal effect is null. It is as if no registration was made at all. Think about the gravity of that. You can go through the court process, get the decree, register the deed, hold the paper. But if you are a usurper, the law treats that paper as blank. It proves that moral rectitude outweighs the bureaucratic certificate. The paper bows to the truth.
You are framing the moral ceiling as a failure of the Torrens system. I see it as its saving grace. But let's dig into the mechanics of this chicanery, as the text calls it. Because there is a nuance here between a void title and a title that is subject to a constructive trust. This isn't just about the title disappearing, it's about how the law corrects the record.
The vocabulary in the source material is surprisingly colorful for a legal text. Chicanery, duplicity, deceit. It paints a picture of the law struggling against human nature. The argument I'm making is that the Torrens system, for all its rigid structure, cannot countenance deceit. The text specifically mentions that if a claim is based solely on a narrow and literal reading of a statutory prescription, but lacks a shadow of moral right, it fails the juridical norm.
Right, and chicanery refers to that specific type of legal trickery using the letter of the law to violate its spirit.
Exactly. So here is the scenario. I trick you. I manipulate the paperwork to register your land in my name. I have the indefeasible title. Under a strict reading of the Torrens mirror principle, where the title mirrors the truth, I should be the owner. But the Supreme Court says no. It says the acceptance accorded the Torrens system would certainly be impaired if it could be utilized to perpetrate fraud. The system admits that its own reputation depends on breaking its own rules when fraud is involved.
Correct. And this is where the constructive trust comes in. This is a vital concept for understanding the framework. The law doesn't necessarily say the registration didn't happen procedurally. It says that because you obtained it through fraud, you are now holding that title in trust for the true owner. You become a trustee against your will. The remedy is reconveyance. The court orders you to give it back.
But that remedy exists outside the certificate. That is my point. The certificate itself lied. It said owner, the fraudster. It required an external moral intervention, the stress of rectitude, to fix it. The text says jurisprudence looks with favor on the action for a reconveyance. It wants to strip the usurper of the false title. This proves the certificate is not a fortress. It's a facade that can be pierced by proof of bad behavior.
I think you are conflating the abuse of the system with the design of the system. If I build a bank vault and someone uses dynamite to blow it open, the vault didn't fail to be a vault, it was subjected to criminal force. The law acknowledges that duplicity is not to be rewarded, but this protects the system's integrity. If the Torrens title protected thieves, it would lose all value in the market. The fact that it can be pierced is what makes it valuable for the honest owner. It guarantees that the person holding the title is likely the true owner, because if they weren't, the system would have corrected it.
Likely is a long way from absolute. And the text goes further than just fraud. It mentions that no stigma would attach to a claim based on a narrow reading if we didn't have these checks. The law relies on stigma, on shame to function. That feels very pre-modern for a highly technical land registry. It relies on the idea that you should feel bad about stealing land, and if you don't, the court will force you to.
The law is always a normative exercise. It tells us what we ought to do. But let's pivot. You mentioned that the system is fragile, not just against human bad faith, but against the physical world itself.
Yes. If fraud is the moral failing, this next point is the physical failing. We need to talk about riparian rights and the erosion of title. This is where the paper reality completely detaches from the physical reality.
This is where we discuss the river.
The river, the stream, the coastline. The source material is very specific. It states, registration under the Torrens System does not protect the riparian owner against the diminution of the area of his registered land through gradual changes in the course of an adjoining stream.
To clarify the terminology, riparian refers to land that borders a body of water.
Right, so visualize this. You have your Torrens title. It has technical descriptions, metes and bounds, specific coordinates. It says you own exactly 10,000 square meters. But nature is dynamic. A river running alongside your property slowly shifts its course over 10 years. It eats away 2 meters of your bank. That land is physically gone. It is now riverbed.
And the law recognizes accretion and avulsion. It's a standard property concept.
It does. But look at the conflict with the certificate. The paper still says you own those coordinates, but the law says, no, the river owns it now. The physical reality of the water overrides the bureaucratic reality of the certificate. If the title were an absolute fortress, one could argue the boundary remains fixed regardless of the water, or that the state owes you compensation for the lost area because they guaranteed the boundaries. But the law says the title does not protect you. The specific eroded portion just vanishes from your ownership, even if it stays on your paper.
I see your point. But I would frame it as the law acknowledging physics. It is unreasonable to expect a piece of paper to stop a geological process. The Torrens System describes the land, but it cannot freeze the land in time. If we tried to legislate that the river cannot move, we would look ridiculous.
But it creates a disconnect. You are potentially paying taxes on land you no longer own. You are holding a certificate that describes a fiction. And this brings us to the other dimension of erosion, the erosion of rights through time, laches.
Right, the failure to assert a claim over a disputed property for almost 30 years.
Exactly. The text warrants that a registered owner's right to recover possession may, by long inaction or inexcusable neglect, be converted into a stale demand.
This is the doctrine of laches. It's based on the idea that if you sleep on your rights, you lose them.
But wait, the whole selling point of the Torrens System is that rights are imprescriptible, that you cannot lose registered lands by adverse possession. That's the promise. Register it and forget it. But the jurisprudence says, not quite. If someone squats on your land and you do nothing, absolutely nothing for 30 years, the court might say, it is unfair to wake this up now.
I have to push back slightly here. Laches is an equitable doctrine. It is not automatic like a statute of limitations. The court applies it when allowing the claim would be inherently inequitable. But I will concede the core point. Ownership is not a passive state. The title is not a license to abandon your property. It requires vigilance. You cannot simply hold the paper and ignore the dirt.
But the fortress shouldn't require vigilance. That's the definition of a fortress. It protects you while you sleep. If I have to stand guard on the ramparts for 30 years to ensure my title holds, then the title isn't doing the work. I am. The fact that laches applies suggests that the title is a living relationship between the owner and the land, not a static decree.
That is a fair characterization. It is a relationship, and relationships have hidden burdens. The source material notes that the certificate is subject to liens and encumbrances noted on it. That's the standard stuff like mortgages. But crucially, it is also subject to statutory liens, which exist even if they do not appear on the certificate.
That is the hidden trap. The ghost liens.
It is the reality of a complex society. You cannot fit every single municipal regulation, unpaid tax liability, or special assessment onto the face of a single sheet of paper. The conclusiveness applies to the identity of the owner, but it doesn't exempt the owner from the law of the land.
But doesn't that make the certificate deceptive? The text says statutory liens which, although not appearing in the certificate of title, may be subsisting. A buyer looks at a clean title and thinks they are safe, but there could be a statutory debt hovering over it like a ghost. This reinforces my view that the paper is just a snapshot, and often an incomplete one,
That is why we have due diligence. The Torrens system is not a substitute for doing your homework. It is a starting point, a very strong one, but not the end of the inquiry. You verify the title, then you verify the taxes, then you inspect the land.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that it's a strong starting point if we consider the third and perhaps most devastating point of our discussion: jurisdiction and the public domain. This is where the illusion of absolutes completely shatters.
You are referring to the elementary principle of law regarding unregisterable lands.
Precisely. We are talking about the foreshore, navigable water, forest reserves, the public domain. The source material is unequivocal. If a person obtains a title, even if it is signed, sealed, and delivered by the government, which includes by mistake or oversight land which cannot be registered, they do not become the owner.
Well, logically, you cannot own the ocean. The state cannot give away what belongs to the people. That is a fundamental constitutional principle.
But the title says you do. That is the conflict. The text says, a certificate of title is not a conclusive evidence of ownership over illegally included areas. Imagine the scenario. You buy a beachfront property. The title includes the dry sand and part of the wet sand. You pay millions for it. You rely on the government's stamp. Then the state comes along and says, oops, the director of lands made a mistake. That wet sand is public domain. Your title is null and void regarding that portion.
I view this as a jurisdictional issue. The director of lands is an official with a specific limited scope of authority. He is authorized to grant titles for alienable and disposable agricultural lands. If he steps outside that scope by granting a title over a navigable river or a forest reserve, he is acting ultra vires. He is acting beyond his powers. The act is void because the power never existed to grant it in the first place. It's not that the title failed, it's that the title was never validly born.
That is a very lawyerly distinction. It wasn't killed, it was never born. But look at it from the perspective of the citizen. They hold a certificate. They relied on the system. And yet the text says simple possession of the certificate does not necessarily make the possessor a true owner. That is a terrifying proposition. You can hold the proof, and the law can say this proof is invalid because of a mistake made by the bureaucrat who issued it.
But consider the alternative. If we upheld the title over the public domain just because of a clerical error, we would be privatizing the coastlines, the rivers, and the national forests. We would be allowing bureaucracy to steal the country's natural wealth.
I agree with the outcome. We obviously shouldn't privatize the ocean. But it proves my central thesis. The title is subordinate to the classification of the land. The public domain is a higher category of reality than the Torrens title. The text says, property of the public domain is incapable of registration, and its inclusion in a title nullifies the title. The paper essentially burns up when it touches the public domain.
Nullifies is the key word there. It protects the public interest. The advocate in me sees this as the system knowing its own limits. The Torrens system is designed for private commerce. It was never meant to conquer the public domain. When it tries to, it fails. That is the system working correctly, by refusing to validate an illegal act.
It's a charitable interpretation to say the system works because it ignores its own mistakes, but it leaves the owner holding the bag. It brings us back to that phrase, simple possession. The text explicitly states that simple possession of a certificate of title does not equal true ownership. It challenges the very definition of possession.
And yet, we must maintain perspective. We are discussing the edge cases: fraud, river erosion, accidental inclusion of the ocean. In the vast majority of commerce, that title is highly effective. It allows the economy to function. Without it, we would be back to the absolute chaos of oral contracts and handshake deals.
But the edge cases define the boundaries of the theory, and the theory, according to the source, is that the protection afforded by a Torrens title is not absolute. That is a direct quote. You cannot call it a fortress if the back door is wide open.
I accept that. It is not absolute. But is it the best we have? Yes. It provides a rebuttable presumption that is incredibly difficult to rebut. You need to prove fraud, or show 30 years of neglect, or prove it's the ocean. Those are high bars.
High bars, but scalable ones, especially the bad faith aspect. I want to circle back to that stress of rectitude idea one last time. It suggests that the law acts almost like a moral filter.
It does. Deceit is not to be countenanced. The Supreme Court is essentially saying that the legal system cannot be an accomplice to a crime. If the Torrens system allowed a fraudster to keep land just because they managed to get the paperwork through, the law would be an accomplice. It would be laundering the stolen property.
And that is why the remedy of reconveyance exists. The text mentions that jurisprudence looks with favor on the action for reconveyance. That is an interesting choice of words. It doesn't just allow it, it looks with favor on it. It actively wants the true owner to get the land back.
Exactly. And that is why I say the limitations strengthen the legitimacy. If there were no reconveyance, if the title were truly absolute regardless of fraud, the system would lose all moral authority. It would collapse because people would stop trusting it. The ability to correct fraud is what makes the valid titles trustworthy.
That's a compelling argument. But for the victim of the fraud, the existence of the conclusive title makes their battle incredibly hard. They have to overcome the presumption. The fraudster waves the paper and says, "Look, the state says I own this." The true owner has to fight uphill against the very system you praise.
They do, and that is the price of stability. We presume the paper is valid so that society can function, but we leave the door ajar for the truth to enter if the evidence is strong enough.
A door ajar is better than a locked gate, I suppose. But it reminds us that the paper is, as Justice Regalado said, merely evidence. It is like a photograph of a house. The photograph is evidence the house exists, but you cannot live in the photograph. And if the house burns down or falls into the river, the photograph doesn't replace it.
That is an excellent analogy, though I would add that the title is a government-guaranteed photograph. But yes, if the thing itself, the legal right, didn't exist pre-registration, or if it is destroyed by law or nature, the manifestation becomes a ghost.
A ghost title. It looks real, it feels real, but you put your hand through it when you try to sell the foreshore land.
Precisely. And you cannot mortgage a ghost.
Well, people have certainly tried, and that is where the duplicity comes in. The text mentions that no stigma would attach to a claim based on a narrow reading if we didn't have these moral checks. The law relies on stigma to regulate behavior too.
That is a profound observation. The legal system relies on shame, the stigma of lacking moral right. If the law were purely mechanical, there would be no stigma, only winners and losers. But the text says a claim devoid of any shadow of moral right is not the juridical norm. We expect our property owners to be moral actors.
Which is a very high expectation for a bureaucratic system.
It is, but it is the aspiration of the law.
I think we have reached a very interesting convergence point here. We both agree that the paper isn't everything.
We do. To summarize my perspective, the Torrens system remains the standard for evidence of ownership. It is robust and necessary. The fact that it has inherent limitations, that it doesn't shield fraud, that it respects the public domain, that it yields to the movement of rivers, demonstrates the sophistication of the legal framework, not its failure. It bends so that it does not break.
And I maintain that simple possession of a certificate does not equal true ownership. Our discussion proves that the protection afforded by a Torrens title is not absolute. It is subordinate to good faith. It is subordinate to the laws of nature, and it is subordinate to the higher definition of the public domain. The certificate is a tool, but it is not the master.
We can certainly agree that the stigma of claiming property without moral right is something the law rejects.
Absolutely. Whether you hold the paper or not, if you lack the moral rights, you are standing on shaky ground.
A powerful place to leave it. We invite you, the listener, to consider the difference between holding a paper title and possessing the true moral right to the land. Is your fortress built on rock, or is it built on sand that might wash away with a stream?
Or is it built on a statutory lien you didn't know existed?
Always the pessimist. Thank you for joining the debate.
Thank you.
Discuss the inherent limitations of registration under the Torrens system. Among the inherent limitations of a Torrens title is that it merely confirms a pre-existing right, and it is not a means to acquire ownership. Justice Florence Regalado has expounded on this limitation in the case of Agne versus Director of Lands. Registration does not vest title, according to him. It is not a mode of acquiring property. It is merely evidence of such title over a particular property. It does not give the holder any better title than what he actually has, especially if the registration was done in bad faith. The effect is that it is as if no registration was made at all. The Torrens system of land registration does not countenance nor shield fraud. The Torrens system of land registration should not be used as a means to perpetrate fraud against the rightful owner of real property. Registration to be effective must be made in good faith. The quality of conclusiveness of a Torrens title is not available for use to perpetrate fraud and chicanery. The Torrens system does not protect a usurper from the true owner. It cannot be a shield for the commission of fraud. It does not permit one to enrich himself at the expense of another. The acceptance accorded the Torrens system of registration would certainly be impaired if it could be utilized to perpetrate fraud and chicanery. If it were thus, then no stigma would attach to a claim based solely on a narrow and literal reading of a statutory prescription devoid of any shadow of moral right. That is not the juridical norm as recognized by the Supreme Court. Deceit is not to be countenanced. Duplicity is not to be rewarded. Witness the favor with which jurisprudence has looked on the action for reconveyance, as well as the recognition of the constructive trust. There is thus the stress of rectitude. Protection afforded by a Torrens title is not absolute. Registration under the Torrens system does not protect the riparian owner against the diminution of the area of his registered land to gradual changes in the course of an adjoining stream. The failure to assert a claim over a disputed property for almost 30 years could constitute laches and bar an action to recover the same. The registered owner's right to recover possession of the property and title thereto may, by long inaction or inexcusable neglect, be converted into a stale demand. Registered lands are subject to such burdens and incidents as may arise by operation of law. The certificate of title is also subject to such liens and encumbrances as are noted thereon, as well as to statutory liens, which, although not appearing in the certificate of title, may be subsisting. A certificate of title does not make the holder thereof the true owner of all the property described therein. A simple possession of a certificate of title under the Torrens system does not necessarily make the possessor a true owner of all the property described therein. If a person obtains a title under the Torrens system, which includes by mistake or oversight land which cannot be registered under the Torrens system, he does not, by virtue of said certificate alone, become the owner of the lands illegally included. A certificate of title is not a conclusive evidence of ownership over illegally included areas. It is an elementary principle of law that portions of the foreshore, beach, or of the navigable water itself, not being capable of registration, their inclusion in the certificate of title does not convert the same into properties of private ownership or confer title on the registrant. If a person obtains a title under the Public Land Act, which includes by oversight lands which cannot be registered under the Torrens system, or when the Director of Lands did not have jurisdiction over the same because it is a public domain, the grantee does not, by virtue of the said certificate alone, become the owner of the land or property illegally included. Otherwise stated, property of the public domain is incapable of registration, and its inclusion in a title nullifies that title.